What's going on, everyone? Honda Fit for Adventure, and today we're going to be installing the HPS cold air intake on a third generation Honda Fit. My first video on YouTube, we removed the factory air intake system and replaced it with an AEM short ram intake. So for this video, we're just going to jump right into installing the HPS cold air intake. If you need help on how to remove your factory air intake system, I'll leave the link of the video in the description below. I'm going to remove the AEM intake right now, and then we're going to compare the factory air box to the AEM short ram to the HPS cold air. Pretty dirty. Before we move along with the install, let's take a look at some of the differences and similarities between all three air intake setups. The stock air box goes from a 2.5-inch throttle body, reduces down to a 2-inch pipe for the math sensor before opening back up for the air filter. The AEM short ram intake is similar to the stock air box in that it starts off with a 2.5-inch throttle body once again and reduces down to a 2-inch pipe for the math sensor and then opens back up to a 2.5-inch filter. This intake setup is often referred to as a hot air intake. I'd like to argue that it is a warm air intake. The Honda Fit is a 1.5 liter 4-cylinder economy box that is not turboed, so how hot can it really get? I have an OBD2 scanner in my car, so I've been watching the temperature difference, and it's only been about 20 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature outside. This is especially true while the car is in motion. Once the car is driving, you still have adequate airflow underneath your hood going in through the front vent. Once you're at a stoplight or a stop sign, yes, the internal temperature does rise for the air intake. Once I added this open face front grille, I noticed that the air intake temperature was only 10 degrees difference from the outside temperature. Now I have even more airflow underneath the engine bay. The AEM intake comes with adequate documentation on how to remove your factory air box and install the new air intake. It also says that it is CARB legal in most states. The AEM intake also utilizes the factory air and coolant lines. Last thing I'd like to mention is that the AEM air intake setup comes with a dry flow air filter. Moving on to the HPS air intake system, you can see this is the only sheet that I got for assembly instructions. You are supposed to scan this barcode, which is relatively small. Take note, you might want to enlarge your barcode for easier scan purposes. Once you've scanned the QR code, you're still going to need to select your vehicle and which intake setup that you ordered. You can see for the third generation Honda Fit, we have 3 intake installation guides. Ours is going to be the cold air intake for the manual transmission. You can see it's taken us to a website with some nice assembly instructions of the HPS short ram intake. I don't see anything on the web page or the piece of paper if this intake is CARB compliant, so you might want to check that out depending on where you live. One of the big differences between the HPS setup and the other two air intake setups is that it's a 2.5-inch pipe all the way through. Here's the AEM 2-inch pipe, and here's the HPS 2.5. For the HPS hardware, you can see we have some aftermarket air and coolant lines, some nice couplings, some much nicer brackets. The HPS intake setup came with an oiled air filter. I will be replacing this with an AEM dry flow air filter. This is to prevent any oil from getting sucked up the intake tube and collecting onto the math sensor, which will eventually start to collect particulates and cause issues down the line. Besides the difference of hot air versus cold air, there's 2 reasons why I'm replacing my AEM intake with the HPS one. My last video, when I installed the front grille, I mentioned that I wanted to start cleaning up the engine bay, and the HPS air intake is definitely going to do that. As you can see, the AEM intake sits straight back. Doesn't take up too much room, but once you add the heat shield, it blocks everything else. With the HPS intake, we're going to go straight down and into the fender area, freeing up all this space back here to see the ugly transmission. My last reason for switching intake setups is that this one was also available in black, which will match the color scheme of the car. And speaking of black parts, I just opened up my air filter and they sent me a white cone instead of a black one. I'm still going to carry on with the install. That part should arrive tomorrow. Because this intake setup will most likely end up into the fender well, I also ordered up an AEM water-resistant dust screen to go over the filter. After years of driving with the AEM short ram intake setup, there was a mass collection of bugs on the cone filter, and that was just in the engine bay. I can only imagine how much it's going to collect lower in the car. Depending on where the filter lines up, I also may drill out some holes and make this non-functional vent actually functional. While we wait for our overnight parts from Amazon, let's carry on with the install. Before we carry on any further, we should also disconnect the negative terminal on the battery. Loosen the hose clamp and remove the coolant hose from the throttle body. Use a small bag to collect any residual coolant. I do have a cup. I don't know why I'm not using a cup. Oh, it's dried on there. I want to be careful not to break this 90 elbow here. Then I'd be really screwed. Oh, there we go. Oh shit, there's a hole in this bag. That's why you should use a cup. Our next step is going to be removing this intake breather pipe. The other end of this was already disconnected from the AEM short ram intake. There you go, it should be a much better angle. Okay, clamp is offish. I'm gonna make sure I don't drop that in the engine bay when I remove it. Let me take this clamp off before it drops into the engine bay. Okay, our next step is to remove the other end of the coolant line. It's stuck on pretty good. It's always just a little harder when you got a camera in front of you. Once again, I'm trying not to drop the clamp into the engine bay while trying to pull this air hose off. Here we go. Let's remove this clamp. So this is our coolant line, which is going to go from the throttle body further back. But what the instructions did not show is that this is the type of fitting that we left off with. There's not a nipple or barb fitting at the other end. There is about a 6-inch piece of extra hose, and then it gets to a nipple, so you're going to have to remove that extra 6 inches. There is enough hose to fully reach back, but that just was not noted in the instructions. So here's the rest of our coolant pipe that goes down to about the end of my finger that we're going to have to remove. This is going to be fun to film and fun to do. Oh man, I'm going to lose my GoPro into the engine bay of the car. So we're going in further back to try and remove this coolant line. Wish me luck. Hose clamp in the back of the engine bay. Squeeze. Alright, I got the clamp up, and now I'm going to wiggle the hose because I don't want to break whatever nipple it is connected to. Oh, I'm gonna remove this without the camera and come back to you. So I got that out. It took about 5 minutes, some elbow grease, and I broke a sweat. With the factory coolant and airline disconnected, we can now remove the factory plumbing. This is something I've wanted to swap out for quite a while. Insert the provided 5/16 barb fitting into the 1/4-inch heater hose and secure the hose using the F1C-11 clamp. So this is going to be inserted into the hose. I'll squeeze that in later. Put our clamps on. We push this in and tighten these up. All right, that took a little work, but the hose is now on our adapter fitting. I'm going to loosely tighten this up until we secure it, because I might want to move this around to hide the flathead bolt. Now comes the fun part of securing the adapter fitting back into position. I think I'm also going to order up some 1/4-inch fancy clamps so it'll look fancier. It's the little things that set the car off. Their instructions are to install the breather hose later, but since we're back here, I'm going to install it now. So we're still going to have to use this clamp at the base. Carefully slide that onto position without it dropping down into the engine bay. Well, I do not have steady hands, so this is why I'm not a doctor. Anyone know Dr. Charles? Honda reference. Now let's insert the barb fitting. I'll probably have to squeeze that while inserting it as well. Oh, that goes in nice and easy. So in the future, I will be replacing this clamp with a much fancier fitting. On the bottom right, you can see our breather port, and the dead center of the screen will be the nipple or barb fitting for the coolant line. So we're going to have to attach the coolant line and run it up front to the throttle body. The HPS instructions said that these hoses are a tight fit and will not require hose clamps. Almost down. So they show the coolant line coming around the back and underneath and into position. Let me find my dress-up piece for my coolant line. I'll leave that off for now because it's probably going to be covered by the intake pipe. Let's slide it as far on as the previous hose. For the rest of the installation, we're going to need to remove my front bumper. I already did a video of that and posted it on my channel, so we're going to gloss right past that. I'll make sure to include a link in the description down below. With the front bumper off, let's get the short ram part into position. Slide that onto the throttle body and point it downward in front of the large wiring harness. I'll show you that in a moment. I want to make sure I can access the nut to tighten this. I would prefer if it wasn't exposed, but it looks like we're going to have to set it up this way for the best presentation. 10mm, of course. Oh, of course, my socket doesn't go that far. All right, that's snug but not firmly tight, so I'm going to slide that off real quick. And we're going to have the mount hold down, connect our two pieces. Again, I'm going to loosely tighten these because we still need to adjust the two pipes to make sure they're adjusted to line up to our mounting points. Now let's slide this down and onto the throttle body. This is the large wiring harness I was telling you about. You're going to want to come around in front of that. Before we tighten this down, let's position the lower portion of the intake. You can see our intake pipe comes right out in front of the fender liner. Now let's use this bracket it came with and secure it to the frame. I had a hard time figuring out where it was supposed to be positioned to the bolt because it showed a white frame picture and mine is painted black. Make sure I'm using the right bracket. We're going to take the bracket, put this rubber washer, secure it with the washer and nut. I'll loosely tighten that now because this is going to screw into the intake pipe. See our threaded piece right here. Screw this into position. Slide this back on home. Don't mind the wiring connected to my front bumper. That's for my PA speaker and light bar. You will not have that. So now let's position this bar. Oh shit. So here's our intake bracket. And there's a nice bolt hole to secure it to right into the frame. Man, what's going on here? My connection point is beyond rusted and I'm having a hard time securing the mounting bracket to it. So I ended up roasting the threaded hole to expand the metal. Let me attach the intake pipe before the metal contracts. I should have filmed that, but you can see the scorch marks. Ooh, that's hot. Finally! Now it's fully attached. The one on the bottom. I don't know if you could tell, but I've started this video off with plenty of energy and I'm getting burnt out. There. Let's attach the breather hose to the cold air intake. I'm finally going to get a chance to use my fancy adapter. It should be able to slide all the way down now. Now I got the coupling in the way. So I'm gonna go get a small socket to tighten this down with a ratchet, and then I'm gonna get a wrench and have a slow process of tightening these down and the other coupling. Alright, I'm gonna swap out the MAF sensor from the AEM intake into the HPS intake. Should have done this before I installed the short ram part, but it's not going to be too much of a hassle because we have all this free room to work with. Just 2 Phillips screws. You can see I'm wearing gloves because you do not want to get this dirty. So once you take it out, try not to put it on the ground or anywhere that it'll get contaminated because you don't want to replace that. No, it did not fall in the Swiss Tracks tiles. Take our sensor out. Let's slide it into place. And let's try to get these screws into position without dropping them. Let's tighten it all the way down. Ooh, the sensor doesn't want to reach, so we need to clip a bracket. So here's the sensor for the MAF sensor. Doesn't quite fully reach, so we're going to need to clip this green bracket. Be careful not to clip your harness. I'm going to do a little bit at a time. There we go. It's separated. Now that gave us a little bit extra to work with. Let me clip this one off. Just gonna clean this up a little bit. That gave us an extra inch. Now we could plug it in to the MAF sensor. Ooh, there's a nice shot down there. That's on. Double check the breather hose. On. Coolant line. On. Coolant line in the back. Secure. My filter still isn't here yet, so let's get all the tools out of the engine bay. Alright, it's several days later. I finally got the air filter I wanted. I mean, it's an actual AEM dry-flow air filter. It's just not black. It's in the Fender, so no one's really going to see it, but I'm going to know. I also found some fog light inserts that are somewhat cheap, and those should be coming in a couple days. So when I take the bumper off to install the air filter, I'm going to pop out these inserts and then leave them off until the fog light inserts arrive. I'm going to leave the bulb out of the insert, and then it should be an actual nice looking ram air, cold air intake going on here. Let's get the proper filter on. Oh, it's so dark, it's stealthy. Our intake sleeve. All right, I'm gonna have the filter screen with the logo in the back. That way, when I put the inlet on, hopefully you won't see the bright yellow. At least that's the game plan. Filter is on. Fairly snug fit. All right, it's on. I want to make sure that's nice and secure because it's not the most accessible thing to make sure it's connected. So I removed my PA speaker, mounted it up on the passenger side. Let's reconnect our battery and then let the car idle for about 20 minutes as I reconnect the front bumper. Supposedly, this lets the computer reprogram itself or get used to it. If there's more air coming into the engine, you don't want to just get in the car and go vroom, vroom, vroom right away. Make sure it's out of gear. right, my fog light inserts have arrived. Let's get these into place. The driver's side should be easy because the filter is pushed back. So we'll just be able to pop it into place. The passenger side has my PA speaker sticking out a little bit past the area, so we might need to recess that back in order to put in the passenger side fog light. Nice. I thought I was going to have to remove the bulb myself. It looks like I don't have to. Nice. Fits right into place. Moving on to the passenger side. So I think I left just enough slack in the zip tie where I can push it back a little bit further and wedge this into place. Oh wow, that's... Ah! Oh my gosh. That is almost factory. Pedal commander to Sport 2. Doing our pulls, let's scan the intake pipe temperature with the thermal gun and we'll see how much heat soak there is. It is 75 degrees outside. What do you think the temperature is going to be? We got 136 degrees on the pipe. So there is the gold wrapping that you could wrap around the intake pipe to help prevent heat soak. But I don't want gold in the engine bay, so we're going to leave it how it is.
And that's how you install an HPS cold air intake on a third generation Honda Fit. Thank you for watching.